it's okay for the United States to have these kind of massive deficit and debts, where debt to GDP ratios will be up over 100% easily, probably closer to 125%.
I think the thing to think about here is how the debt is behaving in terms of its dynamics on the economy, right? The debt is this inert mass that the United States and the taxpayer needs to service, correct? And so even though the debt has gotten much bigger, we've blown past that debt to GDP target of 100, so the debt itself is bigger than GDP measured per year. Debt servicing costs have gone down because interest rates have been so low and have been so and this was not something that many people predicted, but have been so low for so long. It feels like we're moving into, or have moved into, a structural period of low interest rates. And so the amount of debt that the United States can handle has changed a lot, and our views of how much debt and deficits are affecting the economy have changed a lot. Then I also think that we need to think about what we're spending that money on, because if you're spending it on an investment that's going to generate more GDP down the road, something like infrastructure investment, for instance, if you're changing what the country is spending on, I think that can matter a lot too.
So you know that there are a lot of people who agree with the proposition you're making, that fundamentally interest rates are low for long, and therefore we have the opportunity to borrow and invest. But they're saying this Biden bill is just too much. So Larry Summers, who has often talked about the need for more deficit spending, says this bill, 1.9 trillion, is just way too much, and it could trigger inflation, which would then cause a rise of interest rates, which would then mean that debt servicing cost goes up. And he argues the reason, there's a very simple way to measure this, which is, it's a technical term called output gap, but basically is how much has the economy dropped off because of COVID, and there's that gap. The amount of spending planned is 4 or 5 times that gap. That does seem a little too much, no?
Certainly. I think the question is what the spending is doing in the economy. So is this sort of traditional stimulus to get us out of a traditional recession, in which case you would perhaps cause overheating, and you would see that overheating in terms of rising inflation, which the Fed would then have to raise interest rates to cool off? Or is this something different? So when you look at what's actually in the bill and what it's doing, this is billions and billions of dollars, in part to ensure vaccinations, to keep child care centers and schools open, rental assistance to keep people from getting evicted. And then there's another portion which really is true stimulus, so the $1,400 stimulus checks, unemployment insurance payments, PPP for businesses, and some other money for small businesses. But that money isn't going to get used unless it's needed, right? You know, you need to be unemployed in order to be applying for unemployment insurance. And so, you know, I think that if you don't think of it, if you think of it as a kind of rescue package after a natural disaster, which in a lot of ways the coronavirus has functionally acted as, not just as a recession, but as this public health catastrophe that has taken entire sectors of the American economy functionally offline. You know, it seems a little bit strange to be judging it only by the yardstick of it being a more traditional stimulus. You know, in some ways it looks a lot kind of like war spending, right? We're fighting this battle. And so I'm not sure that it makes sense to think of all 1.9 trillion as just being stimulus.
So let me ask you, what's the worst case scenario, right? Like let's imagine that all the spending and these deficits do produce an overheating economy, that interest rates do rise, that inflation does go up. Why do we have in our minds this image of, you know, the 1970s, inflation out of control, very difficult to bring back down. You know, the older memories of Weimar hyperinflation in Germany in the 20s. Are these all wrong?
I think the question is whether that was the lesson that applies now, and whether we could see the same circumstance given that we've moved into this era of very low interest rates. And I think it just might not be as applicable. We haven't seen problematic inflation in that way in a generation. We have no memory of it. And so given that inflation hasn't been problematic, it just seems like it might not be, we might be cooling the economy off to solve a problem that we don't have.
Annie Lau, thanks so much for helping us understand this.
Thanks for having me.
Next on GPS, the United States will soon surpass 500,000 deaths from COVID-19. We will take you to a